Welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday on Al Arabiya News. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. Coming up on the show, Hezbollah's deputy leader pledges the group will continue the fight against Israel as he accuses the US and Israel of wanting to control all the territory of Arab states and all the Muslims. I speak to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, about the rising tensions in the region. In a televised address, Naim Qassem also says a ceasefire in Gaza is the solution to ending the escalating conflict. It comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledges to continue to strike Hezbollah without mercy everywhere in Lebanon, including Beirut. And the Pentagon says components for an advanced anti-missile system that were delivered to Israel should be fully operational in the near future. Welcome. Well, we start with Lebanon, where Hezbollah's deputy leader, Naim Qassem, pledged the group will continue its fight against Israel. In the address, Hezbollah's Naim Qassem accused the US and Israel of wanting to control all the territory of Arab states and all the Muslims, but added a ceasefire in Gaza is the solution to ending the escalating conflict.
بما أن العدو الإسرائيلي استهدف
Since the Israeli enemy targeted all of Lebanon, we have the right from a defensive position to target any point in the Israeli enemy's entity, whether in the center, the north, or the south. We will choose the point that we see as appropriate. I say to the Israeli Home Front Command, the solution is a ceasefire. We are not speaking from a position of weakness. If the Israelis do not want it, we will continue. After the ceasefire, according to the indirect agreement, the settlers will return to the north and other steps will be drawn up.
Well, the address comes just 24 hours after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged to continue to strike Hezbollah without mercy everywhere in Lebanon, including Beirut. He made the comments on Monday at a military base hit by a Hezbollah drone attack that killed 4 soldiers and wounded dozens in the single bloodiest attack on troops inside Israel since October 7th. The Pentagon says that components for an advanced anti-missile system have arrived from the US in Israel and that it expects them to be fully operational in the near future. This comes as the region braces for a response to Iran's attack on Israel. Well, for reaction to this, I'm now joined by the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert. Sir, thank you for making time to speak to us again. And last time we spoke, you and I, you called Netanyahu's war on Hamas a total failure. Since then, another front, if you like, has opened up from Israel into Lebanon with military action over Lebanon. Where are your thoughts on things now?
Well, Rosanna, I'm very happy to speak with you again. I'm not certain that I call the war against Hamas as a total failure. I said actually then, and I think now, that we have achieved what we set for in the first place, which is to try and break down the Hamas military capacity. And at this time, what we need is to end the war in order to bring back all the hostages. This is what we need to do. And this is what I think is the first priority of Israel. As for the war in Lebanon, I think also we had very important achievements. Let's not forget that Hezbollah started the war against Israel without any provocations, without any reason, except that they say that they wanted to assist Hamas. And therefore, they started the attack against Israel on the 8th of October 2023. I think that today already Hezbollah has learned something about the pains of the war against Israel. I can't say that Nasrallah can understand it because he's no more with us. But had he been smarter, he wouldn't have started it. As he wouldn't have started the war in 2006, as he himself said then, after the war, that had he known of what the Israeli reaction will be, he would have never started it. So right now, what we have is we have the war in Gaza should be stopped right now, and the return of the hostages should be accomplished. In the north, I think that we should not further the ground operation because we need to reach an agreement between Israel and Lebanon so that the war will end diplomatically. The way to do it is to proceed with an understanding about the outstanding disputes we have with Lebanon about the borderline and the Sheba farms. This is something that I think can be reached. The Americans and the French are making exceptional efforts in order to bring an understanding about it. And I think that if the Lebanese government and Israel will reach an understanding about these outstanding issues, then we can disarm Hezbollah and move them away across the Litani River line, which will allow Israel to bring back the Israelis, 80,000 Israelis, which are now away from their homes, back to where they live.
But up to the point of further escalation, then, so you're saying, you know, it shouldn't be escalated more in Lebanon and people should get around a negotiating table. You do support what Netanyahu's cabinet and government have decided to do so far in trying to dismantle the Hezbollah command structure, but also sending ground troops and aerial bombardments over parts of Lebanon.
Look, I don't support the Israeli government, period, okay? And however, without whether, you know, I support the government or not, when Hezbollah attacked Israel and on a daily basis, they are shooting 100 and 200 and 300 rockets against Israeli civilians, of course, the north part of the state of Israel, and they forced 80,000 Israelis to leave their homes, and they destroyed their homes as part of this attack. Israel has to respond, and Israel responded and in a very effective manner, and this was inevitable. But I don't want to expand this now. I don't think it should be expanded. I think we have to bring an end to this conflict. But of course, that means almost inevitably that Hezbollah will move out away from the borderline between Lebanon and Israel back into the Litani, across of the Litani River, and that will allow Israelis to return back to their homes, and this will bring an end to the war.
Would you have done something similar?
Had I been prime minister now, I definitely would do it. In 2006, we didn't need to do it because Hezbollah was anxious to leave the south immediately after the ceasefire, and they did it for a few years. They didn't dare then fight with Israel because they were devastated by the Israeli responses. By the way, Nasrallah said at that time on the Lebanese television, he said, had he known before the Israeli reaction what it would be, he would have never started with the abduction of Israeli soldiers and the ambushing of Israeli vehicles that caused the confrontation in 2006. So I thought that as a result of what happened in 2006, that Hezbollah would have learned something. But as it turned out, on the 8th of October this year, they started again. And I think that they already regret what they have done, considering the serious pains that they have been through over the last few weeks in this confrontation between us and them. And therefore, it's time to stop it. And had I been prime minister now, I would have reached the agreement that is broken by America and France to compromise on the outstanding disputes we have on the borderline and conclude the war.
In terms of, you mentioned previously the government of Lebanon, and obviously that's fractured and complicated at the moment. They've got a caretaker prime minister. Reportedly, the US has tried to urge the election of the president in Lebanon. Do you think the election of a president in Lebanon would help at the moment in terms of diplomacy?
I hope so. You know, it's very hard. You know, the problem is that all of us are, each one of us is trying to cope with the difficulties and complexities of the political system in his own country, and then he has to address himself to the complexities of politics in the neighboring country, and then in America, and then in perhaps other places. I hope that the election of president, of a firm, strong leader that will take charge of Lebanon, is very important. And I hope that a leader of this caliber will be elected.
Let's talk about the might of Israel. You were talking there, the sort of reminder to Hezbollah, and they seem to forget, as you're saying, cyclically, just how powerful Israel can be in terms of the way it can respond to attacks. And there are concerns for those inside Israel at the moment that the missile defense system is running out of steam. The Pentagon saying today that advanced anti-missile systems are being sent by the US to begin arriving in Israel, but some military experts are saying that Israel's anti-missile systems are stretched at the moment. There's a shortage of interceptor missiles. The US can't continue supplying the Ukraine and Israel at the same rate, people are saying. Is that a concern to people in Israel at the moment, that the missile defense system isn't as strong as it normally is?
Look, I think there is a gross exaggeration about the difficulties in the Israeli defense system. I think the Israeli defense system, anti-missile system, has been exemplary, has been exceptionally successful. Let's face it. I mean, there was not any precedent, by the way, not even in the war between Russia and Ukraine, that in one shot, the 200 ballistic missiles were fired, ballistic missiles with 1,000 kilos warheads for each were shot at one country, as was the case with Israel. So, of course, there may have been few missiles that hit the targets without any major or significant damage, neither to man's life or to a human's life or to any of the facilities. So, but we definitely need assistance. America assisted us in the first place, together with Great Britain and France and other countries. And this is also quite expected. But I think that altogether there was approximately 500 missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones that were shot at in two different periods successively against Israel, and not one person was hit and killed. That doesn't prove that Israel air defense system is not operating successfully. However, we definitely need help. We definitely need more support. Our resources are not unlimited, and it costs billions and billions of dollars. And thank God we have America that supports us and provide us with the facilities. But even without this, Israel would have been in a good position to defend itself. With this, it's easier and it's cheaper, and these both are very significant for us.
In terms of the US assistance, I'll come back to that, but you mentioned two other countries there, the UK and France, both of whom have had, the support doesn't seem quite as steady and firm as it is from the US. There have been comments from French President Emmanuel Macron in recent months, and then in the UK today, news that the former UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron, who was previously Prime Minister, he's been talking about the fact that he was working on a plan to sanction two Israeli ministers, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, until there was a change of government in the UK. So that's going to put pressure on the current UK Foreign Secretary to maybe follow suit. Does that say to you that you're not getting as much support from the UK as you normally would?
I don't think that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich is a measure of the attitude towards the people of Israel and the state of Israel. As far as I'm concerned, I know David Cameron very well. And I think that he's a friend of Israel, and I think that the UK is a great friend of Israel. And I can understand why they can't tolerate Ben Gvir and Smotrich and what they represent, because I don't need to be British not to like them and not to support them. So let's draw a distinction, which is, I think, quite obvious. Great Britain and President Macron are great friends of the state of Israel and the people of Israel. They are unhappy with certain expressions of the Israeli political system, particularly those that are made by Ben Gvir and Smotrich and the messianic groups, which are extremely right-wing, intolerant, and very provocative and very aggressive. And they express, as friends of the state of Israel, as friends of the people of Israel, their desire that these elements will not represent the state of Israel and the government of Israel. And I completely subscribe to this attitude, and therefore I have no complaints against David Cameron or President Macron for saying this. And I can understand that.
In terms of returning to the US support for Israel, we're going to see these THAAD anti-missile systems, and also there's discussion. We're actually running a story on the Al Arabiya website today, a military expert saying that US troops in Israel, whether or not that's a likelihood in coming days or weeks, that would change Iran's risk calculation, troops and the presence of the THAAD anti-missile system. Do you think that's a possibility, and do you agree that Iran would change their approach accordingly?
I find it rather difficult to read all the peculiarities, I'd say, of the Iranians. What are they up for? But one thing becomes clear, and perhaps this is an important dimension that needs to be taken care of. If Iran is going to seriously engage in a military confrontation with Israel, they may find out that they face not only Israel, but they face the United States of America and maybe also the American friends and the Israeli friends like Great Britain, France, and Germany. So this may have an important contribution to somehow relax the situation rather than provoke it. What it means in terms of Israel, that American soldiers will be stationed here to take part in the defense of the state of Israel, this is new. It has never happened before. But the whole setup has never been before, with Israel fighting in so many different fronts at the same time and for such a long time. And I think that this is significant. I think what it proves is that Israel needs its friends. And the lesson that I would draw, had I been in a position of power in Israel, is that I should respect and be more careful in my relations with America, much more than Netanyahu is showing on these days.
If you need a moment. But let's talk about Israel's anticipated still retaliation against Iran in any substantive way for the missile strikes, the huge missile barrage from Iran onto Israel a few days ago. And when questioned about it, the defense minister, the military in Israel just sort of saying, well, it will happen and, you know, Iran will get a surprise. And we've shown our might so far. We've shown our intelligence capabilities. We've shown our military might. Everyone is asking, what will it be like and when will it happen? I don't expect you to tell me that. I don't expect you know. Perhaps you do. But in terms of what you might expect to happen of that return retaliation from Israel to Iran, what do you think it could be?
I hope that it will be measured, that it will be calculated, that it will not be provocative to the degree that it will force the Iranians to expand the military confrontation with Israel much more than it has already been. In other words, I think that we should listen to the advice of America about what not to attack. And I think that there are so many speeches and so many statements and such rhetoric, which is part of the present atmosphere that, is not always very helpful. I would advise the Israeli government to do what needs to be done. Definitely, Iran needs to be punished. No one can attack another country with 200 ballistic missiles and expect not to be to have to face a counterattack. But we don't need to talk too much. We need to do what needs to be done, and we have to be very careful in doing it in such a way that it will not justify, from the point of view of Iran, expanding dramatically the military confrontation. We are not up for it. They are not up for it. It is not their interest. It is not our interest. And we hope that they will understand it. But definitely there will be an Israeli attack. And I hope that it will be very accurate, very effective, and very thoughtful.
Elsewhere in the show, we're going to be speaking to voices from inside Gaza about the situation there, particularly in the north around Jabalia, where Israel's military have given orders for people there to leave and move south, evacuation almost orders for around 400,000 people is estimated. We'll be going into that with those guests, but I want to talk to you about what Israel's been doing in Gaza over the last week, because there's been pictures and video from a strike on a hospital around a tent that shocked people around the world, people burning in flames, and then actually an article by the New York Times overnight as well, saying that an investigation they've done has shown that Israeli soldiers use Palestinians as human shields. In terms of the way that the Israeli military is being perceived for its actions in Gaza, there's been a lot over the last year, but those two events seem pretty critical. Your thoughts on how this is changing or not changing, this is the way this is impacting the world view of Israel?
Look, I must say that I'm not certain that all that is published in the magazines on a daily basis about what happens in Gaza is necessarily accurate to the dot. I don't know that we use Palestinians as a human shield. I know that Hamas has been using their own people as a human shield in all of their aggressive attacks against the state of Israel from day one. But in any event, I'm sure that you are aware that I said already 8 months ago, perhaps even more, that we should stop the war in Gaza. So that is a general answer, but I guess it answers all the different aspects of your question. I think that we have reached a point where a further military operation in Gaza is not helpful to achieve any of the important interests of the state of Israel. We have broken down the military capacity of Hamas. We have destroyed most of the tunnels. We have destroyed most of the weapons. They hardly have any more rockets that they can shoot at Israel in comparison to what they did at the beginning when they were shooting 2,000, 3,000 a day. Now there is one every few weeks and so on, because everything was destroyed by us. Can we destroy more? Yes. Can this cause the death of more Israeli soldiers? Yes. Can it cause the death of more innocent Palestinians that live in those areas? Definitely yes. Can it expand and increase the humanitarian crisis in Gaza also? So there is no need. There is no objective that needs to be achieved that can be achieved by furthering the war in Gaza. And the worst, of course, is that we may lose all the hostages which are still alive, held by Hamas. So what I think we should do is we should stop the war now, immediately. We should bring back all the hostages in an agreement with Hamas. And we should pull out completely from Gaza, and there should be a deployment of Palestinian force with soldiers from moderate Arab countries, including, by the way, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and the Egypt and Bahrain, that will take place instead of Israel in order to prevent the return of Hamas into any dominant position in Gaza. And there should be an administrative mechanism that will start to take over the control of Gaza and the rebuilding of Gaza together with the international community, so that there will be an appropriate solution for the suffering and the pains that so many hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are undergoing in Gaza as a result of a war that Hamas started against Israel.
I will agree with you that your position, your personal position and your political position has been clear on this, on Gaza, all the previous times we've spoken, and you've been very public about that. So it's clearly different from that of the current government, of which of course you're the opposition. But what do you think the current government is doing in northern Gaza right now? Because clearly they're planning something quite big or protracted.
Well, as you said, my position is different. And I can only regret the fact that the government doesn't listen to the voice of reason and wisdom, and is it does not understand that there is a limit to the use of power that can be of any help to the real interest of the state of Israel. We have to stop the war now, and we have to bring back the hostages. And we have to bring in a security force that will take care of Gaza and will prevent the furthering of any attempts by terrorist groups to attack the state of Israel. That's what we have to do. We have to cooperate with the Palestinian Authority. We have to cooperate with the moderate Arab countries. I think this is what the Americans are anxious to achieve. This is what the Europeans want to do. And we have to build up this joint effort that may bring an end to the war and to the suffering of so many Israelis and so many Palestinians.
Talk to me about the hostages, because obviously October 7th, we've just passed that anniversary, enormously painful for the families of those hostages still not returned and those who lost family members as hostages. Do you think there is still a deal to be done to return any hostages remaining?
Yes, there is a deal. The deal is to end the war. I don't analyze or speculate about the chances on the basis of a certain respect for the human dimension in the heart of if there is none. So the only way that it can be achieved is by ending the war, full stop, ending the war, and pulling out from Gaza. Of course, in return for the deployment of security force that will take over Gaza and prevent any attempt by the Hamas to rebuild itself. This is what I believe needs to be done and can be done, and this is the only way to bring back all the hostages. There is no other way, I'm afraid. I don't even try, to appeal to the human side of Sinwar. The guy who is ready to expose hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to the suffering that they have been through over the last year as a result of his attacks will definitely not feel any mercy for 100 Israelis. So the way to do it is to stop the war. I'm ready to stop the war. Bring them back. Pull out from Gaza. Life is long. And at this point, this is what we need to do.
Just finally, you mentioned that no one's listening to, as you put it, your voice of reason or wisdom on this. Is anybody listening? I don't mean that in a rude way, but is anybody listening to you at the moment? Do you think you've got an audience? Do you think you can apply pressure to the current government? Do you feel any public support?
Look, no one in the government listens to me. That I can guarantee you. I think that what I say, what I speak, the voice that I raise is listened to by millions of Israelis. I don't know to measure the numbers, but I believe that what I'm doing represents a large part of the Israeli population which is anxious to end this suffering of all those who suffer and to bring an end to the fighting and to start a process of healing the Israeli society, which is a very difficult, painful, and demanding process, but it has to be done. And therefore, I think that, as I said, I think that I do not speak for the government. I don't like this government. As far as I'm concerned, they should be out at any moment. And there should be another government. Every other government will be better than this one. And I think that this reflects the attitude of a very large part of the Israeli population.
Former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you indeed. Thank you.
Well, the UN Security Council has said its forces in Lebanon must be protected after it announced yesterday UN peacekeepers will remain in their positions in southern Lebanon despite the threat of Israeli attacks. Now, this comes after members of the United Nations interim force in Lebanon were injured by Israeli forces in recent weeks. For more on this story and the wider UN story, I'm joined now by the former president of the United Nations General Assembly, Mogens Lykketoft. Sir, thank you for making time. And let's begin with the issue of the UNIFIL peacekeepers in southern Lebanon. How big of an issue do you think this is? Of course, Israel has tried to play it down, but at the same time has asked that those peacekeepers move out of southern Lebanon. What do you think is going on here?
I think it's totally unacceptable for the international community if Israel should be able to kick around with US peacekeepers. Of course, it's a very delicate situation, but it must be up to the United Nations and United Nations leadership alone to decide about the position of the peacekeepers.
Do you think that Israel will respect that position, given their relationship with the UN in the recent weeks?
Well, I think that we have heard from the UN that some of the attacks on the peacekeepers now and on earlier occasions has been deliberately targeting UN. And I consider this a little as a continuation of a quote mark war that has been going on between Israel and the United Nations nearly since the United Nations decided there should be a Jewish state in Palestine. Because you have seen a number of resolutions overruled by Israel without consequences, especially the occupation of the occupied territories being colonized by 700,000 Israeli citizens since 1967. And you have seen a constant conflict about the role of UNRWA, the United Nations Organization for Palestine Refugees, which has played a crucial role in maintaining the livelihood, very extremely poor often, but the livelihood, education, health services for the Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere in the area. Because there has been this Israeli opinion that UNRWA was maintaining not only the lives of many Palestinians, but also the identity and the call for a Palestinian state as part of the two-state solution. That has certainly not been the opinion of this present Israeli government. So there's been a lot of conflict all over the years. I would say as early as the original UN peacekeeper being assassinated in Jerusalem in the summer of 1948, the Count Folke Bernadotte from Sweden, by right-wing terrorists, including the later on Israeli Prime Ministers Begin and Shamir.
And it is not been kept secret at all by this current government, by Netanyahu's government, the relationship or the way he feels towards, for example, Antonio Guterres or the United Nations, limiting access for UN officials into Israel,
Right.
as well as speaking directly to them via social media statements, and sort of almost you're seeing these strange battles between Antonio Guterres and the Israeli government at times. Do you think Israel will succeed in eroding people's perception of the United Nations if they continue?
That could always be a fear, but I think that it's more reasonable to think that this trying to command around with the UN will further decrease the trustworthy of Israeli policy. And there is, I know from my presence as President of the General Assembly, Palestine is very high on the agenda for the huge majority of member states in what we call the Global South. Palestine is very high on the agenda because it is Israel is one of the few nations defined in a way by the United Nations, but having been in conflict with the United Nations over the expulsion of Palestinians from Palestine, from what became Israel, and the occupation since 1967, and the new colonization on the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. So there's been a conflict all along, in one way or another. And now it's a very high point of conflict, both because of the situation in Lebanon, but also because of the continuous and advancing Israeli attacks on UNRWA, which is the organization best fitted to help the totally dislocated and exhausted people in the Gaza Strip. And you have seen a shutdown of activities for the UN also inside Israel, and as you mentioned, the ban of the Secretary General visiting Israel. I think that's something probably unknown until now from any member state of the United Nations.
And despite all of that, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu did go to the United Nations General Assembly recently, UNRWA, in New York, of which you were, of course, former president of a few years ago. And when he was speaking, he used it as a sort of an address point to speak to the rest of the world, basically, and put Israel's position out. Several people in UNRWA walked out whilst he was speaking, it must be noted. But tell me what you thought of his visit to UNRWA when you saw it.
I have not been present when he was in the General Assembly hall, but I know that a lot of people left the hall when he was there last time. But what scares me is that a person who is at least accused for war crimes in Gaza, and there's been called for an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court. He was received not in the United Nations hall with applause, but in the Congress of the United States this summer. That shows us something of the problem of getting an international action to stop the present wars in the Middle East.
I mean, you're very clear now in your position, it seems, on Israel and the actions it's conducting. I'm sure at the time when you were president of the United Nations General Assembly, you had to keep more of a neutral, I imagine, role, more sort of removed from your personal view. But back then, even in 2014, you said in an interview, the present Israeli government has no intention to contribute to the formation of a sovereign Palestine or Palestinian state. Have you seen any changes in the past decade or so that have made you change your opinion of Israel, or have you become more cemented in your views?
My view is that we never saw a government in Israel as extreme right-wing expansionist as we see now. The people, including people who have expressed the view that the best solution of the problems in Palestine would be that the Palestinians left the country or was expelled from the country, both in Gaza and the West Bank. And we have seen an escalation, not only the total destruction of society in Gaza and the loss of human lives, loss of human lives, but also the expansion of colonializers, settlers, in violent way on the West Bank. So what has been for all the past 76 years, the United Nations position that there is only one final settlement, and that is the establishment of two sovereign states in what was historic Palestine, has been the fundament for that has been continuously eroded, with Gaza now being a ruin, totally ruined infrastructure and dislocated population, and a West Bank which has been colonized in a way that you can only resemble it with a Swiss cheese, with some few holes of Palestine cities and settlements.
To your earlier point of your concern that Israel does still get access onto the world stage and has international support, of course, allies, huge allies, the United States being its biggest, its funder, it's donating military equipment to Israel. Do you think that will change at any point? Do you think we've got an election coming up in the United States? If Kamala Harris or Donald Trump takes the presidency, can you see a change in approach towards Israel, or will the support become more?
I think it's fair to say that behind the scenes, it's the present president of the United States has been very concerned about the continuous escalation of Israeli warfare, and has defined, with the support of a unanimous Security Council, an armistice plan which was rejected by Netanyahu and his government. And it has been a little unusual and depressing to see that the American president several times has waived with the opinion that there will be an armistice pretty soon, but it's obvious that that was not the intention of the Israeli Prime Minister. And we saw that there was this possibility for an armistice, not only in Gaza, but also towards Hezbollah and with the Houthis in Yemen, if there was an armistice in Gaza. But that was also rejected as a solution. And now we have this a very destructive war going on all over Lebanon, and a very weak, very vulnerable society already before this war started, and now being torn apart.
Now, in terms of European support, you're speaking to us from Copenhagen in Denmark. Do EU countries and European countries, do they feel somewhat powerless when it comes to having any say in trying to implement change or pressure certain directions of the war in the Middle East? Is there a sense of kind of sitting back and being helpless in this?
I think so. And it's also a reflection of the fact, I think we all realize, that the only way there could be some kind of softening of the situation, for some kind of movement over a long period of time towards a two-state solution, in spite of the conditions being worse than ever, is that the United States would put the necessary pressure for ending the hostilities in the region. And we can hope that something will change after the American election. If Democratic president, if Kamala Harris is elected, I don't know, of course, her real intentions so well, but I know that on the other side you have Donald Trump saying to Netanyahu, go on as much you need with military action and end this by military action.
Former President of the United Nations General Assembly, Mogens Lykketoft, thank you very much for making time.
Thank you.
To Gaza now, where Israeli military strikes have killed at least 45 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip in the past 24 hours, as forces intensified operations around Jabalia in the north. According to Palestinian health officials, at least 11 people were killed by Israeli fire near Al-Fallujah in Jabalia, the largest of Gaza's 8 refugee camps. While in the south, 10 people lost their lives in Bani Sahila, eastern Khan Yunis, when an Israeli missile hit a house. 2 bodies were recovered from the ruins of 3 houses in the Sabra suburb of northern Gaza City after an Israeli airstrike, while 5 people were also killed in a strike on a house in the Nusayrat camp, central Gaza. Well, for more on the latest from inside Gaza, I'm joined by the spokesperson for UNRWA, UNRWA in Gaza, Adnan Abu-Hasna. So good to see you again at a very tough time. I mean, it's understating it, really. Talk to us about the situation at the moment that you're facing.
Yeah, it's like a hell, actually, especially in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. There is a huge and a very unbelievable blockade, the army in that area is still, going shelling and striking, everywhere, and many people are being killed. And they are putting people among, 2 choices, to die from hunger, as example, because of the siege, or to leave the area or to be displaced to another place inside the Gaza City. And right now we have nearly 50,000 people left the area of Jabalia camp to Gaza City, but none of them left to the south, where it's Rafah and Khan Yunis and others, because they believe there is no safe place. But in Jabalia camp and the area, surrounding Jabalia camp, there is no water, no food. You can find, blood everywhere, actually, and people expected to be killed in any moment.
It's an unbelievable situation, although after the actions of the last year, somewhat believable. And there's a lot I want to talk to you about: the food situation, the displacement situation. But let's talk about the instructions that people in Jabalia and in northern Gaza have received. Israel's military sending out a warning a few days ago, telling people to leave the area and move south, like you said, but people haven't gone as far as Khan Yunis. It's not safe in the south. Meanwhile, others saying that Hamas have sent messages telling people to stay in the north of Gaza. What are people going to listen to? What can people do? Are there any options?
The only option, for people, they want to survive, actually. Okay, if they're in the Gaza City, it is not a safe place. In the south, it's not a safe place. It's not about Hamas and other political parties. The majority of the population in Gaza, they don't belong to any political party. They're just human beings, like citizens everywhere in the world, just looking for a safer place to survive, to take care of their kids, their children, to find, health system and schooling and everything. But if the IDF instructing them to leave Jabalia, to where? This is the main question. They're asking us this question: where would we go? There's no safe place at all. This is the main question. It's not about the south or the north. And they have been hearing all the time what's going on in the south, and people there are being killed. People originally have been displaced from Jabalia and from Gaza City to the south, and are being targeted and killed. And there is, you cannot find any differences between the north and the south. So the majority of them, they prefer to stay, because if they go to other place, it's the same for them. But, what's going on in the north, it actually, it's more difficult than the days of the beginning of the war after October 7th, actually. They have no choice. The hunger, the death, and to be moved or displaced to another place. But it's for them the same. This is the dilemma of most of the population in the northern part of Gaza Strip.
Let's talk about the hunger, because as you said there, it's been an issue, of course, since everything post-October 7th, but increasingly it seems part of the military strategy and also something that the UN is having to contend with. Today, the UN humanitarian workers saying they're hoping more than 30 lorries of food aid will enter northern Gaza today. And this is the first time they managed to get anything in more than 2 weeks. The bakeries are shut, wells are unusable as well. Talk to us about the actual situation regarding food and water.
There is no food at all in the northern part of Gaza City. They allowed some merchants to get, food into the northern part. If you look at, the prices of the goods that have been, allowed into Gaza Strip, if you can look at, the price of 1 kilo of tomatoes, as example, it's $100. Who can pay for that? People, they are very poor, very marginalized, in the northern part of Gaza Strip, so they cannot buy. So the majority of them, we are talking about more than 400,000 people. The majority of them depending on food aid from UNRWA and other UN organizations. What if it is, we have no, critical information or official, information about the 30 trucks right now, but what does it mean, 30 trucks, 400,000 people? Okay, we need, to open all, the terminals or the crossing points between Gaza and Israel. We have 6, crossing points, and they can get 1,000 trucks if there is a political will into Gaza Strip in 5 hours.
In terms of what's actually happening in northern Gaza, what Israel is currently trying to do there, the UN Human Rights Office saying that the Israeli military, quote, appears to be cutting off northern Gaza completely from the rest of the Gaza Strip. And there's been this analysis over the last few days that Israel is trying to enact some type of what was being called as the General's Plan, but some form of that, basically blockading northern Gaza, telling people to leave, giving them a few days to do so if they can. And then anybody that's left, they'll treat as a military combatant and they won't allow in food and water. Do you think that that's what's happening?
Going to the reality, what's going on the ground, I don't believe that, hundreds of thousands of people will flee to the southern part of Gaza Strip, where Rafah and Khan Yunis and the middle area. We just, looking, what's going on around us, now that they are kicking, hundreds of thousands of people, being displaced 10 times, 11 times, 15 times. But if they really, we have been hearing about the generals, plan, as they call it, to evacuate the northern part and to annex it. But what would happen, to 400,000 people who right now rejected with the majority of them to leave their homes or to leave, in the camps or in Gaza City itself. You can talk. I cannot comment on the plans that the IDF, had or these guys have in mind. But I'm looking what's going on. There is a hunger. There is a death. There is all bad things on the world. The wars of the humanitarian, situation all over the world. Yes, it's there in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. But as a result or consequences of that, we don't see, huge displacement of people or, people want to leave this area despite all the horror and the difficulties they faced.
As you were speaking there, so we were showing pictures of children receiving their polio vaccinations, which of course the World Health Organization has been working hard to gain access to the Gaza Strip and stop the spread of polio. And despite attacks on hospitals and medical facilities in the past few days, they've actually been successful in administering those polio vaccines today. How much of a difference will that make?
Look, in the southern part of Gaza Strip, we succeeded in getting, 93,000 kids, being vaccinated in the first day. Today, the number will increase. The campaign started, yesterday. But the big question, how can we manage that in the northern part of the Gaza Strip? If they continue shelling and killing and, destroying and asking people to evacuate and to be displaced, the big question, how can we manage that? If tens of schools or clinics or our installation, in the northern part of Gaza Strip. I don't know what will happen, but let's see what will be, what's going on in the coming, days.
Talk to us about the type of work that you normally did at UNRWA about a year ago, before all this escalated so much, and how that work has changed in the past year.
UNRWA, all the time, was, the lifeline of the whole population of the Gaza Strip, the refugees in the Gaza Strip, which, they are shaping the majority of the population. They are about, nearly 80% of the population before October 7th. We used to provide food aid to more than 1.2 million Palestinian refugees. We have nearly 300 schools. We're sheltering or having nearly 300,000 kids in our schools. We have 25 big or central, health clinics where millions of visits, health visits to our clinics. We now we are, we feel that we are responsible not only for refugees, but to the whole population. Now 2.3 million, Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, they are depending on our aid, on food, and our health system, which is still functioning. We have right now, 10 big, health clinics and nearly 100 mobile clinics that, tens of thousands of Palestinians are being treated on daily basis. We are responsible of, distributing, food aid to hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in our shelters and people who are, around our shelters, living, beside our shelters, distributing fuel to NGOs, other UN organizations. Logistically, we are able, to continue working, but the lack of everything, lack of food, lack of medical supplies, lack of fuel, actually pushing the whole humanitarian, work, there is a danger, of collapsing.
So do you need to see continued commitments of aid from large countries, not only in the region, but from around the world?
Yes, of course, because, if UNRWA stops 24 hours, it means we are executing the place with its people. You've got people depending on us, 100%, in the Gaza Strip. If we stop providing food, you will see what's going on in the north and the south. Now, people are crying, screaming, and because we are only getting 10% of the aid, of the necessary aid into the Gaza Strip. We are getting only 60 food trucks per day. But before October 7th, we used to get 600 food trucks. So it's, for them, UNRWA is the hope. And if they hear, all the time about the deficit on UNRWA's, budget, lots of panic, lots of fear, because they consider UNRWA as the representative of the international community, the representative of the international will to help the Palestinians and, to get, stability in the region and so many things.
I understand that you are not in a position to speak politically, it's not your role, but I just want to ask you about something that's still, the world is still talking about, these pictures from the Israeli airstrike on a hospital area and tents on Sunday night. The videos and pictures that came out of that have shocked and horrified so many people around the world. They continue to be shared widely. Do you think that will change anything, people's shock and alarm?
I hope so. I hope so, because who paid and still paying the price in the Gaza Strip, they are the innocent. Most of those who have been killed, we are talking about 70% of of those who had been killed, there are children and women. And the international community, after the ceasefire, they will be surprised also that there are many thousands of people had been, died. Not only we are not talking about being killed, because Palestinians used to report about those who had been killed by, during the shelling and the fighting and so many things. But those who died because of the lack of medicine, the lack of people are suffering from cancer or kidneys, failure, and from asthma and heart attacks. You have thousands of people, died because of the lack of food, of hunger, they are ill. You cannot treat them. So the number of people who had been killed and died will be shocking to everybody.
Just finally, while we've got you, I understand, obviously you're not in Lebanon, you're in Gaza, but of your UN colleagues, the news of UN peacekeepers, UNIFIL in the southern Lebanon region over the last few days, being caught in crossfire and being injured, and potentially allegations of attacks on their positions, and that Israel might be trying to push them out of southern Lebanon. What did you think when you heard that news?
Look, we believe that it seems that the UN, the UN in general is becoming a target. Look what's going on with UNRWA, with UNIFIL, how they are treating, the SD, Mr. Guterres. He's a person non grata, he's not allowed to visit Palestine and Israel. What's going on with the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Mr. Philip Lazzarini, not renewing his, visa, and, to visit, or its work, actually. He has his quarter in Jerusalem. They are not renewing his visa. So it becomes like a policy, and, and we feel like the UN is, is targeted. Even our colleagues in Gaza, they are afraid to put, the UN logo on their vests, because they're afraid to be targeted. There's, something is going on is very dangerous. It's not only targeting the UN as entirety, but they are targeting, the international values, what about the Geneva Accord, what about the human rights, values. We feel that, everything is collapsing, unfortunately.
Sir Adnan Abu-Hasna, UNRWA spokesperson in Gaza, thank you very much for making time for us.
Thank you.
Let's get more on the situation in Lebanon now with Beirut-based journalist at L'Orient Le Jour, Salah Hijazi. Thank you for making time to speak to us. And let's just get the latest with the situation in Lebanon today. Talk to us about what it's like in Beirut at the moment.
It's been we've had a few quiet days here in Beirut. It's been since Friday since we've had a strike against the capital or its suburbs, and this is actually more of a worrying situation than it is a reassuring one, because many people fear that it might be hiding something, or maybe that it is the quiet before the storm. Here in Beirut, most people would tell you they are very anxious about this situation. Outside of Beirut, strikes are continuing in the Bekaa and in the south. We've even seen strikes in the north, which is extremely rare. We've seen a strike against the region of Gharta, another in the region of Batroun. All of these strikes seem to be targeting displaced families that have left the south and that have settled in other places where they thought they would be safe.
But in terms of the feeling that Hezbollah is trying to send messages in their statements, not only that they can attack Israel everywhere, but do you feel like Hezbollah Deputy Chief Naim Qassem in his statement was trying to suggest that there is some sort of diplomacy to be done?
Definitely. He called directly on the Israelis, saying that the only solution was a ceasefire, which really shows that the party is interested in ending the war as soon as possible and in engaging in diplomacy. We've heard statements that Hezbollah had even accepted a ceasefire separate from Gaza before its Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated on last month. So yeah, definitely Hezbollah is interested in diplomacy right now and has shown many signs that it is. But I think the Israelis are presented with an opportunity they don't want to lose, to settle scores with Hezbollah and to strike really hard.
So you think that Israel is just not open to that kind of dialogue at the moment?
I think they would not agree to any kind of diplomatic arrangement except one that really requires enormous concessions from Hezbollah, including on its weapons, which is pretty unlikely right now. I think Hezbollah will fight until the end to maintain its weapons in Lebanon.
Now,
because the decision is also in the hands of Iran, not only in the hands of its local leadership here.
Of course. Let's talk more about the situation in Lebanon for the people right now, because some 400,000, it's estimated by the UN, children displaced at the moment. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but around a quarter of Lebanon under some sort of displacement or evacuation order.
Yes, it seems to be that one of the weapons that Israel is using to pressure Lebanon and Hezbollah to make more concessions is the displacement. As you said, 25% of towns in Lebanon have received evacuation statements. A huge number of towns in the south, most of them in the south of the Litani River, but also some in the south of the Awali River, which marks the border between South Lebanon and Mount Lebanon, have received these kind of evacuation orders. We have probably more than a million people displaced right now, and several hundred thousand have crossed the border to Syria. This has led to a humanitarian situation that is very difficult, especially since there's a lot of pressure on services in safer areas like Beirut, for example, the city itself, where many people have fled, but where access to housing, to public services has become extremely difficult as a result of the sudden influx of this massive population.
And tell me what it's like doing your job at the moment, being a Beirut-based journalist, because I mean, for journalists outside of your region, outside of the Lebanon, Israel and Gaza area, it is chaotic at best to keep up with all the updates of everything that's happening with Israel's war on a multi-front basis. So for you being inside Beirut and trying to work as a journalist at the same time, what's it like?
Oh, that's a very tough job because, you know, on the one hand, we have the advantage of being close. We can monitor, we can see, we can hear the strikes. We know easily where they are. But on the other hand, it's difficult to dissociate. You know, it's difficult to not be at the same time a journalist and someone in Lebanon that is affected by these strikes. You know, and you see the destruction, you see the displacement, and it's really difficult to, to control some emotions maybe, or to dissociate oneself from these developments, especially that, you know, going down to the streets can be dangerous sometimes. Being a journalist right now is a very risky job because on the one hand you might be hit by the strike, on the other hand the popular base of Hezbollah, and especially in the areas that are being hit frequently, are being extremely anxious, and they are really looking at journalists in a way that is not really friendly, because they worry that some of them might be giving information, some of them might be taking pictures not for journalistic purposes, but to send them to the Israelis, for example. So we've seen a lot of journalists being, especially foreign journalists, being hit in areas around sites that were striked recently. So yeah, it's really not a tough job right now being it's really a tough job right now being a journalist here in Beirut.
Well, we wish you all the best. We thank you for giving us your time. Beirut-based journalist at L'Orient Leisure, Salah Hijazi.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you for watching and be sure to join us tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.